Hello and welcome.
The idea for the Micronauts comic book series began with the writer Bill Mantlo. During Christmas of 1977, his son received Micronauts toys as a gift from his grandparents. Not only did Mantlo's son appear to prefer these toys above all others, but Mantlo himself found these odd toys quite interesting. He couldn't help himself from wondering about the backstory implied by these uniquely designed, fully articulated toys. A week later, Mantlo approached the Marvel Comics editor, Jim Shooter, and he suggested these toys could be easily adapted into a series. Shooter then contacted Mego, the company that produced these toys, and inquired about licensing the Micronauts property. According to Mantlo, a month later he was handed hundreds of photographs of the entire Micronauts line, many of which had not yet been produced. With that, Marvel had secured the rights to the Micronauts property, and Mantlo was given permission to create the series. It should be noted, this was a time when Marvel was going pretty heavy into licensed material, especially titles that tied into toy lines. ROM, Shogun Warriors, and Star Wars being prime examples of this approach. Later, G.I. Joe and Transformers would also become fixtures in the Marvel Comics lineup. With the exception of Shogun Warriors, these were all highly successful titles for the company. Mego placed no limit on how many of these Micronauts toys Marvel could use, nor did they restrict the creative interpretation of these toys. The only restriction was the Micronauts couldn't appear in other Marvel titles, but other Marvel characters could appear in the Micronauts series. With free rein to do whatever he wanted, Mantlo plotted out an epic storyline for the first 12 issues of the ongoing Micronauts series. So the rise and fall of the antagonist, Baron Karza, was the basis for the first year, and it was plotted out well beforehand. Additionally, Mantlo added 2 characters to fill out the roles the toys didn't provide. Bug was added as the comic relief. Princess Marionette was added as the love interest. Both were integral to filling out the cast and giving it a more interesting dynamic. The original character designs, which Mantlo included with his proposal, were done by Bob Hall. However, Hall wasn't available to draw the series, but he did provide editorial input. Jack Kirby was the next choice as an artist, but his contract at Marvel was about to expire, and it was likely he wouldn't renew. So he was seriously considered, but not approached. George Perez was also interested, and initially accepted the assignment. But he discovered he didn't have room in his schedule to do another series, so he passed. The artist, Michael Golden, was tempted away from his work at DC with the offer of a slightly higher page rate, the opportunity to work on something other than superheroes, and the ability to give his creative input into the series. Also, the DC implosion occurred, dozens of titles were cancelled, and many new artists, like Golden, were taking work where they could get it. While Golden isn't specifically credited as a co-plotter, he does get a vague storyteller credit. According to Golden, the series was done using the Marvel method, so he would receive a plot, and then it would be up to him to break it down and illustrate the entire issue. Afterwards, Mantlo would add the dialogue and captions. Thus the reason for the additional storyteller credit for Golden. Over the course of the series, Golden became more and more disillusioned with the direction of the title. In particular, the inclusion of superheroes, which he had little interest in drawing. Furthermore, Golden was informed his visuals were too confusing, and that he should try to emulate Jack Kirby. Naturally, Golden attempted to incorporate these suggestions, and noticeably, by issue number 8, his style changed. But he wasn't comfortable with the results. Regardless, he did stay on and illustrate the entire original storyline. His visuals helped to establish a series filled with depth, character, and world building, or microscopic world building, as the case may be. For the record, the microverse in this series was directly inspired by the microverse that appears in Fantastic Four. Mantlo expanded on the idea, separating the microverse from the macroverse with an impenetrable space wall. This barrier was maintained by the Time Travelers, a group who utilizes the Enigma Force. It's this mystical force that permeates the microverse and holds it together. In fact, this Fantastic Four connection would be explored in issues 15 to 17 of the Micronauts series. The Fantastic Four and the Micronauts team up to battle Psycho Man, the villain from the original Fantastic Four story. Now, I need to self-insert at this point. Micronauts is a series that just worked for my young, developing mind. So everything that follows is filtered through the rose-colored lens of nostalgia. It can't be helped. This is one of those moments where any objectivity is questionable. And honestly, I don't care. Even a million years after it was initially published, the first year of Micronauts is still awesome. That's a hill I'd climb up and defend most days of the week. End of self-insert. The series opens on a populist revolution, engineered by Baron Karza. Karza has created immortality with his body banks, and he promises to offer this to the general public in exchange for his leadership, or dictatorship as it turns out. The ruling royal family are on the run, with only Princess Mary escaping Karza's soldiers. At the same time, Arcturus Ran and his psychically linked robot companion, Biotron, return from a 1,000-year journey exploring the stars. As he will soon discover, his mission of exploration was rendered useless due to the invention of warp drive soon after his departure. So while he slowly wandered at light speed, the empire he served expanded and integrated the cultures he'd previously encountered. Karza orders Ran to be detained and imprisoned because he represents an X-factor, an unknown quantity that may produce unpredictable results. Ran is captured, and while in captivity, he meets and befriends both Bug and Acroyer, the disavowed prince of the Acroyer world. Together, these three escape, taking Princess Mary and her robot, Microtron, along with them. They manage to get to Ran's starship, the Endeavor, and breach the space wall, the barrier between the microverse and the macroverse. They appear on Earth, no larger than the size of toys. According to Mantlo, both Jim Shooter and Stan Lee, the publisher of Marvel Comics, couldn't understand the first issue. It was too convoluted, with too many elements. So Mantlo and Golden tried to simplify as they went along. Quite honestly, the first issue reads just fine. There are a lot of moving parts, but it's reasonably clear what's occurring and why the events are taking place. It sets itself up as a space opera with a hero, a princess, and a cast of supporting players, all of whom are opposed to the dictator villain. There's chemistry, camaraderie, and a quest to establish a greater good. Spiritually, it does bear some resemblance to Star Wars, which was immensely popular at the time, and Jack Kirby's Fourth World, which Mantlo cites as an influence. Most notably, the Enigma Force, which is a mystical energy with unspecified capabilities that appears to be a direct result of those two works. At the same time, it is a unique blend of these influences, becoming its own transformative work. The only element that seems forced is the relationship that develops between Princess Mary and Commander Ran. They do have some playful banter, and there's no rush to get them together, but it doesn't feel organic. All things considered, this is a galactic space opera, not a romance comic, so developing a genuine relationship between these two probably wasn't a high priority. Following the first issue, the Micronauts have a series of adventures on Earth before finally returning to the Microverse. In the meantime, Baron Karza solidifies his power and assumes the role of a cold-hearted dictator. At one point, he's able to leave the Microverse and enter the Macroverse. With the intervention of the Time Travelers and Captain Universe, Karza is defeated, sent back to the Microverse, and the closing chapters of this year-long arc begin. The war to liberate Homeworld begins on Spartak, the homeworld of the Acroyers. Baron Karza and his fleet attack, eventually capturing Ran and Princess Mary. Meanwhile, a rebellion led by Prince Argon, Mary's brother, erupts on Homeworld. Seeing his body banks in flames, Karza returns to Homeworld with Ran and Mary. Acroyer merges with the Spartak world mind and destroys the invading fleet. The Acroyers then proceed to Homeworld. In a surprise twist, Commander Ran turns into Time Traveler, the being directly connected to the Enigma Force. After a brief metaphysical explanation that Ran's consciousness created the Time Traveler and harnessed the Enigma Force, Karza is defeated. Homeworld is liberated, and a new era for the Microverse begins. While there may be some flaws and nits to pick, the powerful lens of my nostalgic goggles conveniently overlooks them. There is something quite enjoyable about the tidiness this ending represents. It's a saga that does wander a touch in the middle, but when the Microverse is re-entered, it stays on point and delivers an action-packed conclusion that really holds up. In a way, it really feels like a finite series, excluding the final pages of the 12th issue, where future events are set up. A universe has been conquered, then freed, with a new unity between worlds established. As an epic, it's quite satisfying in all aspects. On the strength of this beginning alone, it's no surprise the series was a success and that it continued on for many years. Beginning with issue number 38 in 1982, Micronauts, along with Moon Knight and Kazar, were the first Marvel titles that were exclusively distributed to comic book stores. This was a pilot project to test the viability of the newly established direct market. Reportedly, sales were even better than on newsstands, and, from that point forward, both Marvel and DC began to shift their distribution model to start relying on this new market. So, historically speaking, Micronauts were part of an important turning point in the comic book industry itself, the integration of the direct market. Following the conclusion of the epic introductory arc, Michael Golden would quit doing interior art, but continued to provide covers for the next year. At which point, the new regular artist, Pat Broderick, would take over all of the art duties. The legendary artist, Gil Kane, would also provide artwork later in the run, as would Jackson Geiss when Kane left. The point being, it was a series that had its share of artistic talent. Bill Mantlo would write the entire series, with the exception of the final issue. With the 59th and final issue, a new creative team consisting of Peter Gillis and Kelly Jones would take over the title. It was subsequently rebooted as The New Voyages. This series carried on for 20 issues in total, after which Marvel let the license lapse. In recent years, both Image Comics and IDW have produced a variety of series with the Micronauts license. Notably, neither Bug nor Princess Mary were included, due to these being original characters created for Marvel. Both of these characters have been used in other Marvel comics. For the most part, Princess Mary is a rather obscure presence, barely making any appearances, while Bug was included in the rebooted early version of the Guardians of the Galaxy. Unfortunately, these rights issues are very likely why the series hasn't been reprinted in recent years. It's definitely a title worth being archived and preserved in these digital times, but that's unlikely to happen. It's the same problem that ROM and other licensed properties share. The rights to characters are split between two companies, and well, it's a basic legal nightmare. It's hard not to acknowledge the tragic circumstances of Bill Mantlo. In the 80s, while writing a variety of titles for Marvel, Mantlo studied law and passed the bar exam in 1987. By the late 80s, he had effectively left the comic book field and took a job being a public defender. This career was short-lived. In July of 1992, while rollerblading, Mantlo was the victim of a hit-and-run accident. The driver has never been identified. As a result, his cognitive abilities have been irreparably damaged, and he's been in institutionalized care ever since. This is an injustice that is both cruel and unusual. Regardless, there is a body of work, such as Micronauts, ROM, and the creation of Rocket Raccoon, that stands as a testament to a talent establishing a legacy for others to explore. In the end, with nostalgia put aside, Micronauts begins with a 12-part epic that delivers and satisfies. It may have began as a licensed toy property, but Bill Mantlo and Michael Golden shaped its humble roots into a classic series that has endured for years. This video is brought to you courtesy of these very fine people. If you're not already subscribed to this channel, I encourage you to click the subscribe button and support Overlord Comics. If you'd like to go a step further, click the join button and choose the option most suitable for you.